Hello, it's Thursday, and this week I'm going to show you how to make a Deaths-head Hawkmoth. Now, he is the only moth you'll ever want to find in your yarn stash. A written version of this pattern will be sent out to my patrons and will be made available in my Etsy store, usually within 1 to 2 weeks. I will leave links in the description down below for anybody who's interested in that. Okay, let's get into tools and materials. So for today's project, you're going to need 8-ply 100% acrylic yarn, which is also known as DK or double knit, in 3 main colours. So you're going to need a greyish brown for your main body colour. You're going to need, I'm using a cream, but you can also use white for the skull marking on the back. And you're going to need some pale yellow for the other features. Now, I also have a scrap amount of a brighter yellow that I'm going to use for some of the body tufts, but that really is just a small amount left over from another project. You're also going to need 20mm safety eyes, your 3.5mm hook, scissors, pins and needles, and some stuffing. So for today's project, you will also need a wire or slicker brush, and we're going to use that to brush our project to make him nice and fluffy. But that's it. Okay, so to start with today, we're going to make the head and body piece. Now to do that, we're going to start at the tip of the face, and then we're going to work our way down, doing a lot of color changes to put his back patches in and the patches on his little fuzzy butt as well. So grab your hook and the main color that you're choosing to work with. So we're going to start by working up his fuzzy nose, and we do that by working a magic ring of 6. And then 2 repeats of a single crochet, and then 2 increases. So 1 and 2. So it's my first repeat, so we're going to do that again. Which should get us up to 10 stitches around. We're then going to do 2 repeats of 2 single crochet, 2 increases, and a single crochet. Like so. So what you should have at this point is an oval that is 14 stitches around. So we're now just going to work the next 5 rows to finish working up his head, and then we're going to stop and position our eyes. So there we are at the end of row 8, and we will now be positioning his eyes. So if you turn your head sideways, you'll note that he does have a bit of a forehead that slopes away after the nose. We're going to grab our eyes, and we're going to count 5 rows back from the starting magic ring. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And I'm just going to insert my first eye there. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So these are just loose starting positions. Now I am going to wait to snap on the backs until we've made up a little bit more of the body. The reason I've positioned the eyes now is just because it helps remind us which side is the top, and that can help us when we're placing the little skull icon on the back. So without snapping my backs on, I'm just going to continue on the head now. So the next row is 24 front post single crochet. So to do front post single crochet, you'll be working around the post of the stitch instead of through the loops, and you'll be working it from the front back to the front. So what that looks like is I'm going to insert my hook through the gap between the stitch, around the post of the stitch, back out through the next gap, yarn over and pull up my loop, and then finish my single crochet as per usual. So that's my first front post single crochet, and I'm going to work 24 of them in total around the edge of the head. And the reason we do that is it's going to give us that really nice definition between the head segment and the body segment. I don't know the name of the segment of moths, but this is the internet, and so I'm sure someone in the comments will tell me. But we're going to go with the head, body, and butt, I think. So there we go. So you'll see that that forms this ridge around the edge of the head. There's 24 in total. And then in the next row, we'll be swapping back to working through the loops. So when swapping between front post or back post single crochet and regular single crochet, it's really easy to gain or lose a stitch. So what I always do is I count backwards from my hook, and I'm going to count back 24 because that's the number of stitches in the row. So 1, 2, 3, 24. And that means my next stitch will be worked in these loops, not in this little gap, which is trying its very best to trick me up there a little bit. So because we count backwards from our hook, we'll know exactly where our next stitch should be worked. So we have 2 more rows to work before our color changes kick in. Please watch out for the fact that they do have several pairs of brackets in the rows themselves. All you do is read them from left to right and just take each thing one step at a time. So the first row that we're dealing with is 6 single crochet. Then 3 repeats of a single crochet and an increase, so stop and do all 9 stitches. Then we do 6 single crochet. And then 3 repeats of a single crochet and an increase to get us up to 30 stitches in total. So they're not too hard if you just take them one chunk at a time. So go ahead and do the next 2 rows. So there we are. You'll see that we've built up this nice little lip because we want our back to be nice and big and chunky. And the next row we're going to be starting the color changes that build up our little skull icon. So to build up that little emblem, you're going to need your second color ready to go as well. So the row starts with 2 stitches in our gray and then 8 stitches in our cream. So what I'm going to do is work the first stitch and then we'll do our first color change. So in this pattern, and any pattern of mine really, you'll always be doing your color change in the stitch before you want the new color to be active. So you're going to want to keep that in mind as we work through the next few rows. So I've worked my first gray stitch there, and in the second stitch, we'll be working our color change. So I'm going to insert my hook, yarn over and pull up a loop. So I've got 2 loops of my old color on my hook there. I'm just going to move my gray out of the way, so holding it down the hook works, and grab a strand of the color I'm changing to. So I'm going to pinch that at the base of the stitch so that the tail runs off in the same direction as my grey does. Then I'm going to yarn over with the new colour and pull through those 2 loops. Now your stitch will be a little wibbly wobbly and I'm just going to give that grey tail a little bit of a tug just to tighten it into place. So what you'll see there is we've got a finished single crochet in our old colour, but our new colour is on the hook ready to go. Now because we'll be swapping backwards and forwards between these 2 colours so much, I'm not going to trim my grey off at this point. Instead, I'm just going to sort of leave it attached and we'll pull it across when we're ready. So the next instruction is 8 single crochet in our cream. And so I'm going to work 7 of them and then we'll change back to our grey in the 8th. So there's the 7. And so here is our 8th stitch. So I'm going to insert my hook through the stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop of the colour. So we've got 2 loops of our old colour on the hook. Hold that one out of the way. Then I'm just going to run the grey, pull the grey forward and across the work, not pulling too tightly because we don't want to make it pucker, but just run it across the work, pinching at the base of the stitch, yarn over with it and complete that stitch, tugging on the cream tail this time to tighten it nicely into place. So there is the first 8 stitches of the cream, and then we're going to complete the row with 26 stitches in our grey. So just like that. So that is the first row of our skull complete. And at this point, if you're like me, you might notice that your eyes are slightly off to one side, which is why we didn't snap the backs on straight away. I will move those once we're done building up our skull. So the next 2 rows are worked basically the same way, just working backwards and forwards between your cream and your grey, paying attention of course to when you want your new colour to be active. And at the end of each row, you should count to make sure that you still have 36 stitches. Okay, so take your work for a swirl if it's gotten tangled up like mine has. There we go. So that is the end of the 3rd row of our skull. So you see that we've just got the starts of the eye sockets there, and I finished it off by changing back to my cream because the next row starts in cream. But the next row actually does something kind of cool as well. So because I'm always working in the spiral, when I try and do little designs like this, I find that they end up creeping off to one side or like melting off in a diagonal. And so I've done something this row to help counteract that I thought would be an interesting little tidbit to share with you guys. So it starts off as per usual, where we're going to work 3 single crochet in our cream, then 1 in our grey, so changing straight back, So one brown, and then we've swapped back to our cream, and I'm going to work a single crochet. And then in these middle 2 stitches, I'm going to work a decrease, and I work that just by picking up the front loops of the next 2 stitches, yarning over and pulling up a loop through both of them, and then completing the stitch. So that's an invisible decrease. And then one more in cream before changing back to our grey. One in grey. And then we're going to do 2 single crochet and an increase in our cream. Changing back to our grey in the last stitch of that increase. There we go. So you'll see that those are the eye sockets finished up, and we'll be working the nose up in the next round. So what this increase and decrease pairing is doing in terms of this row is it means that we're maintaining our 36 stitches around, so the growth stays equal, but it means that our design, instead of melting off to one side, it's giving us that little bit of growth we need on the left here, while shrinking us down in the middle where it's not as noticeable. So I don't know how that will play out in larger designs, but on this one here, it basically helps keep our skull, instead of cattywampus, keeps it nice and straight. So we're just going to continue on now, and we have 4 more rows of these color changes to finish off the skull. And then we're just going to twirl to victory and trim off that cream, because as of that row, we are finished with the color changes for this section of the body anyway. So as of the end of that row, we get a little bit of a breather before we start our next round of color changes. But what we're going to do first is we're just going to finalize this eye position and do a little stuffing. So first off, what I'm going to get you to do is flatten out your piece so that your skull is centered nicely. And I think it really emphasizes how wonky my eyes are. And then I'm going to just adjust them so they're still in row 5, but just so that they are evenly on either side of that center skull. So there we go, like that. Hey buddy, got any lamps? And then we are just going to snap the backs onto our eyes. There we go. And then stuff firmly up to our opening. So I'm just making sure to really fill out those sides, like so. So now we're just going to enjoy the next 3 rows before our next round of color changes begin. So you'll see that we've expanded back out to 30. So now we're just going to work 8 single crochet to move our starting position. And then we'll begin doing our color changes between our gray and our yellow to finish working up the butt. And when you're near the end of the rows, don't forget to stop and stuff. And then as we near the end, we're going to trim off our yellow. Make sure that we're stuffed all the way to the brim. Then work our final round and finish off. Now, as per usual, I'm going to leave a little bit of a tail, and then to close off this opening, I'm just going to weave that tail through the front loops of each of the remaining stitches and pull tight to close like a reverse magic ring or a little drawstring bag. And then going to take this end and tuck it away inside the body, just like so, and give it a good squidge to redistribute any stuffing. So there is our head and body piece. Now you might note that it's looking a little bit flat and not very fuzzy at all, and that is because we will need to brush this later. First up, we're just going to finish making all of the pieces, and then we'll do all of the brushing in one hit. So we're going to pop that to one side. And next up, we're going to make his little legs. So I have some pins in mind currently holding a specific pose, just for transparency's sake here. So we're going to make 6 little legs. So we have 4 that are one length and 2 that are a little bit longer. So that they make up the front legs and the back legs. But other than that, they are all made with the exact same pattern. So start by grabbing your grey, and we'll make the short leg first. And we're going to start by working up a little tube that's 6 single crochet around. Now the trick to these legs is creating those little segments so that they look nice and insecty while still keeping them chubby and cute so that they don't go too creepy. So you can let me know in the comments if we're walking that line or if I've just disregarded it completely and creeped everybody out. So just like that, that's the start of our little leg. So now we're going to create that first kind of join or elbow segment. So we're going to do that by expanding out to 9 stitches around. So we do that by repeating 3 times, an increase, and then a single crochet. Now I am using invisible increases for this, which is just when you work through the front loop for the first stitch and then through both loops for the second. So there is our little leg at this point. You'll note that that row has expanded us out, and now we want to create that definition. So to do that, we're going to do 9 back post single crochet. Now before we were doing front post, where we insert our hook from the front and then back to the front, like so. Back post is going to be a little fiddlier on this piece, but thankfully we have this larger lip to work on. So back post is when you insert your hook around the post, but from the back of the piece, back around to the back. Pull up your loop and then complete the stitch. So we're going to do that 9 times around. Feel free to bend and distort your piece however you need to do to get those stitches to work. And I would never try this on a piece smaller than 6 single crochet around. So there we go, that works up the first little join in that leg, and so that will now be visible regardless of how much we stuff the piece. So then we're going to just continue working up that little segment. Now just like with the front post single crochet, we're going to count backwards from our hook to work out where our next stitch should go, because sometimes it's there and sometimes it's there. So, and it's there, so on we go. Now you can stuff these as you go if you prefer. I'm going to be stuffing mine all at the end. So that is the second segment all worked up, and so now we just want to work up the top segment of the leg. So to do that, we're going to expand out to 12 stitches around by just putting an increase into each of those stitches. And then with that new little platform that we formed, we're going to work 12 back post single crochet and finish working up the leg. Now, if you're finding these legs too small to work on, or too fiddly, or too difficult, there is an alternative, because basically these legs are largely hidden under your moth. So while they're a nice to have detail, they're not strictly necessary for the final piece. So if you want an alternative that's a little bit easier, a little bit gentler on your hands, this is what you should do instead. Do the first 5 rows the same as I have on the screen. But after that, rather than worrying about adding segments to them, just work up 12 additional rows of 9 single crochet around each. So that will leave you with some pretty basic looking tubes, but they will act as your legs just fine. So there is our finished leg with its 3 clearly defined segments. Now you can warp these to sit at certain angles, or train them to. You can choose to insert some wire if you like. I've done that on some previous insects. I'm not going to be doing it today. So that is your short leg. And we're also going to do a longer leg. So to do the longer leg, what you should do is work up a short leg exactly the same as we have here, but don't finish off. Just like so. And all we're going to do is add an additional row of 6 single crochet around the top. Such a small change. Won't really matter if you don't do it, but it gives you just that little bit of extra length on those back legs that I think does make a bit of a difference. So yeah, there you have your front leg and your back leg, and the difference is so minuscule, I don't even know why I'm making a distinction, honestly. but there you go. So you're going to need 4 of this one and 2 of this one here. And you're going to want to add just a little bit of stuffing to each of them. So as I mentioned, you are able to stuff as you go if you prefer. I'm just going to shove some stuffing down inside each of these now with a poking implement. I'm going to focus that stuffing in the foot and middle section and leave this top section mostly empty. Then we're going to use just a little editing magic to do the rest. And just like so. So there are our 4 front legs and our 2 back legs. And we're just going to pop those to one side as well. So next up, we're going to tackle his little antennae. So those are super quick and easy. And all you're going to do is grab a piece of yarn and we're going to start with a really long tail. Okay, so about that long, about a hand and a half. And we're going to start by adding a slip knot to our hook. And I'm going to single crochet over the top of the tail 15 times. So you'll note that I'm just holding the tail firmly, inserting my hook underneath it, yarning over around it, and completing my stitch. So that first one's going to be the most difficult. And from there, it should feel pretty much like working into a magic ring. It's just there's no ring. Once your stitches get long enough, you can hold them in the same hand as your tail and it creates the right amount of tension. So that's 12 there. So those are already pretty long antennae, so you can stop at that point if you like. You'll note here that my stitches were really tight to begin with and then they got really loose, and so that's on me for not maintaining the correct tension, but it's not going to matter in terms of this antenna. So I'm just going to do 3 more stitches. And then to finish off, I'm going to cut both strands so that there's maybe 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches. I'm going to pull both of them through the loop and then pull that to finish. So now we've got this slightly floppy piece of stitching. I'm going to grab the original tail. I'm just going to give it a little bit of a pull, and it's going to want to spiral in on you. But the idea is that it just creates that little bit of tension and that little bit of curl. So we're going to give it a slight pull just to give it a little bit of attitude. So with this one here, note that I'm letting it form this S shape. So this bit will sit over the eye like that, and then that bit will curl up and around to give him a sassy little eyebrow. So I'm going to create another one of those. So there's our second one, and I'm once again just going to give it a little bit of a pull and then just stretch those stitches back out until they're sitting how I want them to, or close enough. And there is his second sassy little eyebrow. Okay, and off to one side. Okay, so next up we're going to be making his wings. Now these wings are a split wing, so they are made in 2 pieces. So we have a lower wing all in your yellow, and then we have this top wing which is actually done with a double strand that we then fluff up to give it this nice mothy texture. So we're going to start with the lower wing. So grab the yellow you've been using, and this piece is worked up as a flat piece, which means we're going to be chaining and turning at the end of each row. So we're going to start by chaining 19. Just like that. So this piece uses a kind of an odd combination of stitches in my opinion. So we're going to start by turning, and we're going to work in our second chain from our hook, and we're going to work a row of 18 half double crochet. So the way we work those is we're going to yarn over our hook, insert into the stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop. So you'll note that you have 3 loops on your hook, but then we're just going to yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. So that's what makes it a half double, and we're going to work 18 of those along that chain. So just like that. Now if you find that your stitches are warping already at any point during this wing, just give them a little tug to straighten them back out. You want to be encouraging this piece to sit pretty flat. So at the end of that row we're going to chain 1, and I'm going to turn my piece so we're working back into the tops of those half double crochets. And we're going to start the next row with 2 decreases. Now these decreases are worked exactly the same as we would with single crochet. So I'm not yarning over, they're not like half double decreases or anything like that. They are regular, boring, normal decreases. Just like that. We're then going to do 10 half double crochet. And then we're going to finish that row off with a decrease 3. Now there are only 2 in this entire pattern and I've snuck them into the wings. So all a decrease 3 means is we are single crocheting the next 3 stitches together. So I'm going to insert my hook into each of them and pull up a loop. So that's 1, that's 2, and that's 3. So 4 loops on my hook, yarn over and pull through all 3 of them. So just like that. I'm then going to chain 1 and turn, but I'm being very careful not to pucker that stitch because we don't want it to curl in, we want it to stay sitting nice and flat. So I'm then going to work 11 half double crochet back along the row. Before finishing that row with a decrease. Chain 1 and turn. So you're now just going to work up the next 4 rows using those same methods. And once you finish that final row, we're just going to work slip stitches along this edge back to our starting point, which is just going to make this tail a lot easier to hide. So just working into the stitches where they appear. It should be about 8, but the exact stitch count doesn't really matter. Until we are all the way back to our starting point. And finish off. So pull the little wing flat. So it's going to try and buckle on you, but it won't. We won't let it. So that's 1 of those, and you're actually going to need 2. Just like so. So those are our lower wings, and now we need to do our upper wings. So as mentioned, your upper wings are worked as a double strand of your grey and your yellow. Now because we are double stranding, you could choose to go up a hook size if you like. I'm going to be using the same hook as I've done previously for the rest of this project because it can be done, but I don't want to pretend it doesn't put a bit of extra strain on your hands. I find that keeping the smaller hook size, even though we're working with a much larger strand of yarn, gives you really tight stitches which hold up a lot better to the brushing that we're going to be doing in just a minute. So we're going to grab our double strand, and this piece is also going to be worked up flat, using the exact same techniques as we used on the smaller wings. Now for this wing, because we are working in a double strand, we'll be working the whole thing up in single crochet instead of half double crochet. So the reason for using half double crochet in the smaller wings was just to try and keep the stitches looking proportionate with the larger wing. So there is 1 of your wings, and you're going to need 2 of them. So now the final step we need to do in our preparation before we start our assembly is actually to fuzz up certain key pieces of our moth. So in order to do this, we're going to need the head and body piece, and we're going to need his large back wings. You're going to want to unpin anything you've already pinned on and grab your wire brush. I'm going to start with the wings because we don't need to be very neat with those. They are a little bit more beginner friendly if you've never done this technique before. So to start with, we're going to only fuzz up one side of each wing. So you're going to want to decide at this point which one's your left wing and which one's your right wing. So I'm going to do my left wing first. And then the way this technique works is you're just going to brush. And you'll see that we're getting all these little torn fibers. And it slowly starts to form a lovely fuzzy coat. So I'm brushing in all directions here. And you see that patch is starting to fuzz up nicely. So work your way across the whole wing. You're allowed to give it a good scrub. And just make sure that things are getting nice and evenly fuzzy. So at this point, I can see this bit here is looking good and fuzzy, but this bit's not, so I'm just changing my grip. Now you will experience some actual breakage, so you'll see here that I've got some fibers getting caught up in the bristles of my wire brush. We'll notice this more when we do the body. That stuff there I tend to put to one side and use as either stuffing, or I've just bought some needle felting needles that I'm very excited to try, so I'll be using it for that as well. But yeah, basically a little bit of breakage is to be expected. Okay, so when things are all looking nice and fluffy, take a moment to brush it so that the fur is running in the correct direction. So for me, I tend to brush it down this edge and then out along this edge. You know, that's what it looked like before, and this is what it looks like after. Like so. And then you see we've got this really rough, spiky edge. I'm just going to take my scissors, just give it a little fluff cut. Not cutting the actual stitching itself, but just fixing up the rough edge of the fluff. There we go. So there is our first outer wing done. And we'll be doing the same thing to the second one. So just like that, give it the same haircut. Little bits of fibre flying everywhere. So those are the two wings done. So now we just need to fuzz the body. For the body, you can fuzz as little or as much as you would like. Now on our original little moth here, I did fuzz his whole body up, but I found that it very quickly obscured the marking on his back, and I didn't like that so much, so I ended up trimming it down. What I'm going to do for the one today is I'm going to focus most of my fuzzing efforts on his fuzzy butt. So we want this whole section completely fuzzy. And then I'm going to fuzz his head, and then I'm going to come back and just see how I feel about this middle section. So to fuzz just one section, you just focus your brushing in that section. Once again, working all the way around, brushing in all directions. So that's a pretty nicely fluffy butt. And now I'm just going to do his face. And you don't need to worry too much depending on the material you've used that your safety eyes are made out of. These ones here are plastic, and I'm not going to like deliberately scrub at them with the bristles, but they should stand up to this just fine. Then brush his face down nice and flat. Just give him a little comb with your fingers. Arrange the fuzz. So the wings are going to cover most of this middle section, and I personally am going to leave this skull free and clear this time around. That said, you know that if you brush it out, it'll look a little bit more like this. All I did here was I brushed it using the same method in the wire brush, and then I trimmed it all off short with scissors. So you can also do that if that is your preference. So now we are finally going to move on to assembly. So first up for assembly, we're going to pin on all of his legs and sew those on. So I'm going to flip him upside down so that I'm looking at his belly. And I'm going to grab my two longest legs. I'm going to pinch the top of them flat. Any direction doesn't really matter because the legs are the same the whole way around basically. And coming quite far into the belly side, but not all the way to the middle, maybe 2 stitches out of it, I'm going to just pin that so that the back edge of the leg runs alongside this butt piece. Like so, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So that's with your 2 longest legs. Still cute, not creepy, hopefully. So they will be angled. So next up, you're going to grab any 2 of your middle legs. Once again, squish the top of them flat, and you're going to sandwich them right up next to those back legs so that that whole top segment is basically directly alongside. I love it when my pins give a good crunch. It's like you know that they've locked in really well. Same thing on the other side, so there's those 2 legs. Now these are the legs that are going to make him cute or they're going to make him creepy. So these are the ones you have to be the most careful with. So I tend to like to give mine a little like preemptive curl to make them cute. And then we're going to attach them so that like they're just in front of where those middle legs are, but we want them curled towards the front like that. Now because there's no wire in any of these limbs, I'm going to use a couple of stitches to lock a pose in place when I'm done. So once again, we're going to give it a little preemptive curl. Position it just in front of the other ones. So all 6 legs should attach to that middle body segment. None should be attached to the butt or to the head, so that's where the headline is there. You'll see that we are still 2 free rows fully before we hit the head. Okay, so that's all 6 legs pinned on. I'm going to flip him over. Brace yourselves in case you're creeped out by this kind of thing. So those little legs are sticking out at all kinds of angles. Yeah, and I think that's going to work just fine. So I'm going to grab one of my needles and some of my grey yarn, and I'm just going to sew each one of these legs in place. So I'm just going to start at the front. I'm making sure that my needle is inserting through like both layers of that leg. And because this is going to be the underside of my bug, I'm not being very like specific or super careful onto how these stitches will look, because this side of your moth will never really be visible. And I just stop once I've done the first 3 to pull out all of the pins and tuck any of those tails in just to make the second side a little easier. Now you'll note that because we've only sewn them along the bottom, they kind of flop down, and this creeps even me out. So next up, what we're going to do is flip him over, and I'm going to stitch him down along the top of his legs as well, just to firmly attach them to the body. And at this point, this should be when you are stitching any poses that you want as well. Just thread my needle out through the other side. So this is really quick and really easy. We're not like stitching down every stitch or anything like that. So I'm out through the leg, one stitch over. I'm just going to poke it up and out and through the top. And then back down through the leg. So that it no longer flops in that horrible, creepy way. And even just one stitch per leg should do the trick here. So there, I've stitched a little bit more of a pose into the front and back legs. The middle ones I've left a little bit more freeform so that I can position them as I would like. So hopefully that's either less or more creepy depending on what you're hoping for at this point. So the antennas are going to go on last, which means next up we're going to be positioning his wings. So grab your bottom wings, and each one's going to line up with a cheekbone of the skull. And then repeat on the other side. So we're going to sew this on just to the corners. So the edge of them should flow along the body. Okay, so next up we're going to prepare the little tufts for his armpits. So what you see here is that I'm taking that scrap of bright yellow yarn and I'm cutting it into shorter pieces. So these are, what, 3 or 4 inches long? Somebody help me with the imperial measurements there. And then I'm going to take my brush and I'm just going to fluff them out. So you should expect quite a lot of breakage from this process. But in the end, you should have something that looks a little bit like this. It's a bit of a hot mess. So just pop that to one side. You're going to need it in a minute. So we're going to grab our large wings and we're going to sew these on next. So grab your little moth body. And while some moths do have their wings depicted like kind of spread all the way out here, this particular moth has been designed to have his wings back and down. So all you're going to do is identify that first line of the skull, and that's the row you're going to attach the tip of your wing to. Then it's just about lining it up so you can see just a peek of that yellow. Now don't worry too much if you've got kind of a weird gap between your two wings. That's what we're going to fill with our yellow fluff in just a minute. So that's one, and then we're going to do the same thing on the other side. So now what I'm going to do is sew this wing on, and to do so I'm just going to sew this little triangle on just to the body. Just like that. So his little fuzzy cloak is now attached. So what we're just going to do next is disguise this little armpit area with a little bit of fluff. Just because that seems to be the mothy fashion at the time. So we're going to grab those yellow strands we fuzzed up earlier. That includes any sort of stray yellow bits from your brush. They're not necessarily not useful. And you can intersplice some strands of your pale yellow as well if you would like that look. So it's just a matter of what you think your moth's style is. So I'm going to pluck out sort of 1 strand's worth of fuzz at a time. And we're going to attach it using lark head knots. So how we do that is we loop it over so that I've got the 2 ends sticking out one way and I've got the middle of the yarn thread just in the middle there. Then I'm going to insert my hook just through one of the stitches in this little armpit kind of area. And I'm going to loop it through the middle of that strand of yarn. And we're going to just pull it through that opening, but not all of the way. See where if we've pulled it about halfway. I'm then just going to grab both of those tails and pull it through the loop. And pull it nice and tight. So there is the first sort of puffy strand. So what I'm going to do is attach 4 or 5 more of them to each side, and then we're going to give it a little bit of a haircut. So there we go, just like that. So I've done 3 strands on either side because they were looking very fuzzy indeed. You should fuzz yours as much or as little as you like. I believe needle felting would also be kind of good for this technique, but I'm not quite at the confidence level where I'm going to suggest that in one of my like official patterns. So. And then I'm just going to give it a little bit of a trim off. So how I'm going to do that is being careful not to like pull anything else loose. I'm going to brush it all up in the same direction, but it'll show me more clearly what I'm working with. And you see we've got this really like jagged kind of long end there. Then I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut down into it, because we want it to stay fairly jagged and fluffy. We don't want a nice straight edge this time. Then just like mush it up a little bit. And there we go. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So brush the wing tuft, then just contort yourself for the camera and fluff it up a little bit. So there are his little armpit fluffs. Now, for me personally, at this point he starts looking like he's got fuzzy pigtails, and I just think that's really adorable. So last but not least, we just need to attach his antenna. So I have them here from before. So I think I already showed this, but basically you just pin them so that that first curve bends around the eye and the second curve kind of trails off with a little bit of sass. And basically your tails should be in the center. So I'm going to pin that one on, and then we'll do this one as well. Just because this particular kind of moth doesn't have fuzzy eyebrows from what I could see. So there are those, and we're just going to sew those on now too. I'm just going to sew the area between those two pins and leave the rest of it free. So there is your finished moth. I hope you had fun making him with me today. Please think about hitting the like button if you did. Now, next week we're moving on to something a little bit different, where I'll be doing mystery patterns again, and this time I've been challenged. You'll have to tune in next Thursday to see by who. Okay, bye.
Hey buddy, you got any lamps?